19 Sergeant of Central. 19 Sergeant, check.
He's walking eastbound.
Every officer, regardless of their assignment, is going to wind up in a courtroom setting at some point in their career. Some of the worst times I had on the job weren't getting shot at, weren't getting beat up. They were getting grilled by a sharp defense attorney on a witness stand. I hope through this next segment, I will help you avoid some of the most uncomfortable times that I had when I appeared in court. The judge you're going to hear from next is one of the most experienced people you will ever hear talk about courtroom testimony. It's important that police officers hear from judges themselves what they think about. How do they evaluate police witnesses? What goes through their mind when they're making judgments on your testimony when you're on the witness stand testifying in court?
Since I was a kid, I've known about police officers in the law because my father was a policeman. My dad was head of the bomb squad at the City of Chicago Police Department for 35 years. My first job as a lawyer was working for a personal injury firm as a law clerk. My next job was as a prosecutor with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for 4.5 years. But when I left, I was happy to leave for a little while and become a defense lawyer and try and represent the people who were charged with crimes and see that they got representation as well. After 20 years of working in the court system as a lawyer, both civil and criminal work, I decided that if I was lucky enough to get to change careers and get elected as a judge, I'd like to try that. And for 10 years, I heard hundreds of cases every year. I listened to thousands of police officers testify, thousands of civilians testify, and watched a lot of juries make decisions, but also made a lot of decisions myself as a judge. Well, the first thing is be yourself. All of us have different personalities, different ways of presenting ourselves. All of us have different ways of filtering information. You can't change who you are as a witness. Whoever you are, that's how you're going to be as a witness, and be comfortable with that. Don't try to outsmart everybody. Don't worry about what people think about you. Remember, you're there in order to help the system along. You're there to perform a job, and your job is to testify truthfully, accurately, and to answer questions you can, and not to try and answer questions you can't. Well, veteran officers, of course, are a little bit different because they have a lot of history of being in court. And they've seen a lot of good things and a lot of bad things happen in court. And sometimes that affects their ability to be completely neutral when they get into court. So their job is to remember they're neutral. They're there in order to present evidence on behalf of the state to try and win a conviction. But they're not there to be the prosecutor, they're not there to be the judge, and they certainly aren't there to outsmart the defense lawyer. Not that a policeman can't outsmart a lawyer. We know that that can happen. But if you try to do it every time you're in court, or if your mindset is that I'm going to beat this guy up at his own game, he isn't going to trick me, what you do is you end up in a little game of your own and you forget the bigger picture, which is there's a lot of evidence coming in. You're not the only piece of it. There's a lot of ways to make a decision, and one of it is, how do I believe this officer? And if you look like you're an advocate for something as opposed to a neutral, you end up being less credible, in my opinion. You're always, with some cases, in the spotlight because you know you're going to be cross-examined about every activity that you engaged in. But remember, you don't get to ask questions. It's a lot easier being the lawyer. I only have to ask questions if I'm the defense lawyer or the prosecutor. You have to answer them. And by answering them, if you get too cute, if you ask a question back, well, what would you do, Mr. Defense Lawyer? Are people going to like that, or are they not? Think about who you are. The basic premise of all witnesses ought to be tell the truth, be honest, be as forthright as you can, and don't become an advocate for anything in particular. There isn't really a benchmark. I mean, there's no one critical factor that you can always point to say this is going to make a good witness or a bad witness, or a good police officer witness or a bad police officer witness, because it really depends on the whole circumstances of the case. Where do they fit in? A lot of times in cases, there are civilian witnesses, and all the police officer does is talk about what he did and why he was there, and he's really a technician more than an investigator. The important cases are where the police officer is the investigator, where he found the evidence and why did he look there and how did he determine what it was and how did he protect the evidence and what did he do in his investigation. You know, detectives are doing more of that work. For the street copper who's on the beat and who kind of comes across things as they happen or makes an instantaneous arrest, we want to believe that his credibility is he's just doing his job. He didn't pick out this guy because he didn't like the color of his hair or because he's riding with a beautiful girl and he wanted to stop the car to talk to the girl. Or he didn't make this stop because he saw this guy 2 weeks before and the guy was smoking reefer. You know, those are all things that the defense is going to use to try and show that the police officer had an ulterior motive. The benchmark for a good witness is the credibility that we're all looking for in ordinary life. Somebody who's just there doing their job, not coloring the circumstances, not trying to make up any answers that they don't know, and not trying to be an extra prosecutor, just trying to be the regular Joe or Jill doing their job. I'm not sure I know all the tricks. I learned plenty of them in my years in the business, but let's take an example where there's an issue about whether police used extraordinary force they didn't need to use. Maybe in an arrest, maybe in trying to get a confession. Well, one of the things a defense lawyer is going to try to do is show that you got a short fuse or that you're prone to violence or that you can be very aggressive. So how do you show that about somebody? Well, you try to irritate them. You try to get under their skin. You try to get them to react in some way, even if it's only a flash of the eye or a body movement like, "I'd like to get you outside in the alley, Buster." And believe me, police officers can do that. I had a father as a police officer. I saw that look a lot of times. And even as a lawyer, I might have that look, believe it or not. That's one thing that the defense may try to do. Show that you're so aggressive that it's likely you did grab this guy around the throat or hit him in the head with a phone book when you're trying to get a statement from him. You deny that it ever happened? Well, what kind of guy are you? Let's take a look at you, officer, while you're on the stand. And the defense lawyer says, "And isn't it true, officer, you've had 22 complaints for violating people's civil rights by using excessive force?" Well, you could say, "Hey, jam it in your nose, buddy. None of them have ever been sustained. I've never gotten a day off." You could answer that way. Or you could say, "You know, in this business, we're always dealing with people under high stress, and a lot of people get upset when the police come around, even if it's just a traffic ticket. I stop people for 10 miles over, you know, they think I'm arresting them for murder. They get upset." That's just what we deal with every day as police officers. They certainly aren't happy if they're picked up for drug use or for an unlawful use of a weapon or a robbery or a murder or a rape. They're unhappy people. But you know what? That's just the way it is. And people are complaining about me in this case. I didn't do what they're saying. I like that answer a lot better. And you know what? So will a jury and so will a judge. Remember, your job is to convince people that you're only out trying to do the right thing. You're doing your job. You don't have a personal stake in whether Joe Schmo goes to jail or doesn't go to jail. Your personal stake is that you did a good job, you handled yourself professionally, and that your credibility ought to be accepted.
Officers need to understand when they get into court, their credibility is oftentimes going to be attacked. Sometimes it's the only thing the defense attorney has to work with. So don't take it personal. We live in an adversarial system, and that's how the game's set up. Write your reports from the perspective of a defense attorney. Imagining that you're the defense attorney that's going to have to defend this case. What issues would you be looking for? What areas of attack would you be looking for to come at a police officer on the witness stand? If you're not good on paper, see what other officers write. Write a good, concise police report. Tell it like it is. Be straight up about what happened, how it happened. You're going to be a lot better off when you do testify in court. I testified in both state and federal court for over 25 years. And every time I testified, I was nervous. Don't let that nervousness overcome you. What you did right will come out. What you didn't do right is probably not as important as that defense attorney is going to try to make it out to be. Don't be afraid to admit any mistakes that you've made. Nobody's perfect. Go out there and tell it like it happened. There's always an issue of cops overreaching in their zeal to put people in prison. So sometimes they feel that they have to have an answer for every question. You're not supposed to remember everything. So don't be afraid of saying, "I can't recall" or "I don't remember." If you keep these things in mind, you're going to be much more effective and professional when you are testifying on the witness stand.
Sergeant of Central. 19 Sergeant, check.
He's walking eastbound.